Do you remember the sandwiches that didn't need a chef, just a slice of bread, a bit of imagination, and 10 minutes? There was a time when America's kitchens ran on speed, thrift, and creativity, and lunch? Well, that was an art form made from leftovers, pantry scraps, and whatever mom could pull together before the baby cried or the bus showed up. These weren't gourmet deli sandwiches with artisan sourdough and imported cheese. These were working-class lifelines, whipped up in church basements, rural farmhouses, and school cafeterias. From peanut butter and pickles to mashed potatoes and onions, each one tells a story not just of hunger, but of survival, resourcefulness, and surprisingly, flavor that still holds up. You won't find these recipes trending on TikTok or plated at modern brunch spots. But open an old church cookbook or flip through a 1950s homemaker's guide, and there they are waiting to be remembered. So today, we're dusting off 30 of the fastest, strangest, and most heartwarming sandwiches to ever grace a lunchbox. Some are sweet, some are savory, and a few might just leave you scratching your head. But every single one is a bite-sized window into America's culinary past. This is more than just a recipe list, it's a forgotten flavor tour through vintage kitchens. Let's start where it all begins, with a sandwich that sounds like a dare, but once ruled the school cafeteria. The peanut butter and pickle. It sounds like a joke today, peanut butter and pickles? But for decades, this was the real deal lunchbox hero. Back in the Great Depression, families had to stretch every crumb. Protein was precious, and flavor was often a luxury. That's when this oddball pairing took off, a sandwich made from pantry staples that delivered way more than you'd expect. By the 1960s and 70s, it had become a familiar favorite across American schools. Kids opened their brown bags to find soft white bread layered with a thick smear of peanut butter and crisp, tangy pickles. No one flinched. No one traded. It just worked. The pickles, whether dill, bread and butter, or whatever was on hand, brought a briny crunch that cut right through the heaviness of the peanut butter. Sweet and salty. Crunchy and creamy. A balance born out of necessity, and surprisingly, out of brilliance. Old church cookbooks and Depression-era recipe cards often listed it as a 5-minute fix for tight times. It was fast. It was cheap. And most importantly, it filled you up. This wasn't a sandwich made for guests. It was built for busy moms, hardworking dads, and kids who needed energy to make it through the school day. It was made in silence during early mornings and eaten on park benches, school steps, or the back of pickup trucks. But as processed foods took over and lunch culture shifted, the peanut butter and pickle sandwich faded quietly into obscurity. Today, it gets laughs, but back then? It got the job done. It may not look pretty. It may not sound right. But taste it once, and you'll understand why so many remember it like a secret handshake from a forgotten time. It wasn't made to be hearty. It was made to impress. The pineapple and cream cheese sandwich didn't come from hunger, it came from hospitality. You'd find it at 1960s church potlucks, garden teas, and in the pages of ladies' luncheon cookbooks, where quick recipes still had to look elegant. The beauty? It only took 5 minutes. You'd take slices of soft white bread, crusts trimmed, of course, spread a generous swipe of cream cheese, and crown it with a juicy ring of canned pineapple. That's it. Some folks chopped the fruit for easier bites. Others went bold with the full round, maybe even topping it with a maraschino cherry for color. It wasn't a sandwich you made because you were starving. You made it when company was coming, when bridge club was starting, or when you just needed something light, sweet, and showy with no oven, no stove, no stress. In the post-war boom, canned pineapple became cheap and wildly popular, riding in on the back of Hawaii's statehood craze. Cream cheese was also having its moment, going from delicacy to daily staple. This sandwich captured all of that, a blend of convenience and mid-century flair. Lightly sweet, slightly tangy, and easy on the eyes. It was finger food that felt like something more. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find it on any lunch menu, but back then? It made women feel like hostesses. It turned a simple slice of bread into something worthy of the good china. One bite and you're not just tasting pineapple and cream cheese. You're tasting a moment in time when quick food still dressed up for the occasion. It wasn't for kids. It wasn't sweet. And it definitely wasn't trying to be ordinary. The olive nut sandwich spread was the adult sandwich, the one you'd find at garden parties, book clubs, or church picnics in the 1940s and 50s. It came from a time when homemade didn't mean complicated, just clever. All you needed were 3 pantry staples: chopped green olives, crushed nuts, usually peanuts, sometimes pecans, and a generous spoonful of mayonnaise. Mix it all together, slather it between slices of white or wheat bread, and trim the crusts if you really wanted to show off. Salty, tangy, creamy, with a nutty crunch that made it feel fancy without being fussy. This sandwich didn't shout. It whispered. It belonged on doily-covered plates next to pastel mints and teacups. Women made it in minutes, but it landed on the table like something that took all afternoon. That was the magic of the era, making simple feel special. You wouldn't catch a kid asking for this in their lunchbox. It wasn't designed to please picky eaters. It was for people who appreciated punchy flavors and grown-up textures. The kind of bite you took after saying, "Just one more round of cards." Some variations added a little lemon juice or swapped the nuts depending on what was in the pantry. But the soul of it stayed the same, a 10-minute spread that transformed the humble sandwich into something refined. It quietly disappeared as tastes changed and party food got more polished. But once, this little triangle of salty richness was the undisputed queen of the vintage luncheon table. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't gourmet. But in the 1970s, this sandwich meant one thing: you were home. The cheese and ketchup toast sandwich was the ultimate after-school fix. You didn't need a recipe. You didn't even need much food in the fridge. All it took was white sandwich bread, a slice of American cheese, and a quick swipe of ketchup. You'd toast it until the cheese melted just enough to bubble at the edges. And the ketchup? It warmed into something tangy, sweet, and weirdly comforting, like a makeshift tomato sauce without all the trouble. This sandwich didn't come from cookbooks. It came from moms who were out of ideas and kids who didn't complain. It showed up on chipped plates, next to a glass of milk or maybe a stack of potato chips. It wasn't a weekend meal or a dinner party item. It was for now. For when you were hungry. For when the groceries hadn't been bought yet. It was a product of its time, when food was practical, fast, and unapologetically processed. No one worried about macros. They just wanted something hot that made the kitchen smell like someone cared. And for millions of kids? That melty cheese and warm ketchup did the trick. Eventually, it faded away. Microwaves, frozen dinners, and pre-packaged snacks took its place. But for those who remember it, this sandwich still holds the power of a warm, red and yellow memory: soft bread, simple comfort, and the feeling that you were safe, just for a little while. It didn't come from luxury. It came from the back of the fridge and the bottom of the barrel. The mashed potato and onion sandwich wasn't made to impress. It was made to survive. Born in rural kitchens during hard times, especially during the Depression and wartime rationing, this was the kind of sandwich you threw together when the meat ran out and payday was still days away. Leftover mashed potatoes were never wasted. Spread them cold onto soft white bread, slice in a few sharp rings of raw onion, and if you were lucky, a pinch of salt and pepper. Maybe even a smear of butter if you could spare it. The result? A sandwich that sounds bleak, but somehow worked. The creamy, soft potato filled your stomach. The raw onion delivered a bold bite that cut through the blandness. Together, it was just enough flavor and just enough substance to get you through the next chore, the next shift, or the next afternoon in the field. This wasn't Sunday dinner. It was Tuesday survival. You wouldn't find it on picnic tables in the city. But out in the heartland, in small farmhouses and mining towns, it showed up everywhere. Quietly. Reliably. Again and again. No crust trimming. No fancy plating. Just carbs, bite, and grit. It never made it into glossy magazines or five-star menus. But for the families who relied on it, the mashed potato and onion sandwich was real food made by real people in real moments of need. And while it's nearly vanished today, in its time, it fed the hands that kept America going. If you grew up in the 1950s or 60s, chances are Spam was king. After World War II, Spam became a kitchen staple across America, cheap, shelf-stable, and surprisingly versatile. But when it met canned pineapple, that's when things got interesting. The Spam and pineapple sandwich wasn't just food, it was fantasy. A 10-minute tropical escape served between slices of white bread. You'd fry up thin slices of Spam until they were crisp and caramelized at the edges, then top them with a ring of sweet, syrupy canned pineapple. No fancy glaze, no garnish, just two humble ingredients that made magic. Some toasted the bread. Others added mayo or mustard. A slice of American cheese? Optional. But the soul of the sandwich stayed the same, salty, sweet, and just exotic enough to feel like something special. This was post-war optimism in edible form. As Hawaii became the 50th state, America fell hard for all things tropical. Pineapple sales soared. Luau-themed dinners took off. And Spam, originally a wartime ration, was suddenly showing up in playful, everyday meals. This sandwich captured the spirit of that time, fast, fun, and fearless in flavor. But as tastes changed and Spam lost its spotlight, the sandwich quietly disappeared, dismissed as a relic of another era. Still, those who remember it fondly. Because sometimes, happiness came in the form of a hot slice of Spam, a juicy ring of pineapple, and a lunch that made Tuesday afternoon feel like a Hawaiian vacation. In a sea of soggy PB&Js and bologna on white bread, one sandwich dared to be different. The apple and sharp cheddar sandwich wasn't about leftovers or frugality, it was about waking up the lunchbox with something that actually had flavor. A little crunch. A little bite. A little surprise. This sandwich had its heyday in the 1970s, when nutrition was starting to matter, but convenience still ruled the day. Parents wanted to pack protein and fruit in one go, and cookbook writers leaned into the idea of balanced lunching with easy, wholesome combos. Here's how it went: you'd slice a tart, crisp apple, think Granny Smith or Macintosh, layer it onto hearty whole wheat bread, and top it with sharp cheddar cheese. Some folks drizzled honey on top. Others added a touch of mustard for zing. And just like that, you had a sandwich that was fast, cheap, and totally refreshing. It didn't drip, it didn't spoil, and best of all, it actually tasted good by the time lunch rolled around. Sure, some kids looked at it funny. But the ones who got it, they never forgot it. This was the sandwich of library moms and clever lunch packers, the one you found in spiral-bound PTA cookbooks and health-conscious parenting guides. It was sweet and savory. Crunchy and creamy. A sandwich that felt a little smarter than the rest. And while it may have vanished from today's cafeteria rotation, it still stands as a reminder. Sometimes, the best meals come from the simplest pairings, and a willingness to put fruit in your sandwich. If you grew up in mid-century America, this sandwich wasn't just lunch. It was pure joy wrapped in white bread. The peanut butter and marshmallow cream sandwich, known lovingly as the fluffernutter, was the sticky, sugary star of school cafeterias, after-school snacks, and the occasional just one more bedtime bite. Its origin traces back to the early 1900s, when marshmallow cream was first jarred and sold as a miracle ingredient. But it wasn't until the 1950s and 60s that this unlikely duo, thick peanut butter and gooey marshmallow spread, found each other between two slices of soft white bread and captured the hearts of kids across the country. The method was simple: peanut butter on one side, marshmallow fluff on the other. Smack them together and you had a sandwich that oozed out the edges, glued to your fingers, and left your lips stuck together just long enough to make you laugh. Was it nutritious? Not exactly. But in the post-war era of indulgent convenience foods, nobody cared. This was a 5-minute, zero-cook, all-flavor win, and every kid knew it. The Fluffernutter became a regional icon in places like New England, where marshmallow fluff was born, but its influence spread fast. It showed up in school lunch trays, backyard picnics, and even on state fair menus. Some kids added banana slices. Others toasted the bread. But the base was always the same: childhood decadence on a budget. Over time, it faded from most homes, pushed out by granola bars, fruit snacks, and modern nutrition advice. But for those who remember it, the Fluffernutter wasn't just a sandwich. It was a memory. A mess. A moment. Before egg salad became bland and beige, it was bright yellow, a little too sweet, and absolutely everywhere. In the 1950s, 60s, and well into the 70s, this wasn't your basic deli egg salad. This was Mom's recipe, the kind she found in church cookbooks or clipped from the Sunday newspaper. And it always included sweet pickle relish. You'd start by hard-boiling a few eggs, sometimes overboiled, with yolks crumbling into powder. Then came the mayo, a splash of mustard, maybe a pinch of sugar or vinegar depending on the family. But the real magic? That bright, briny spoonful of sweet pickle relish. It turned simple mashed eggs into something bold and craveable. Spread it on soft sandwich bread, often white, occasionally wheat, and you had a picnic classic, a lunchbox regular, and a potluck favorite that showed up in wax paper bundles all across the country. This was portable comfort. It was a quick, protein-packed meal that didn't require meat, didn't break the bank, and didn't need heating. Moms loved it because it was cheap and fast. Kids loved it because it tasted just different enough to feel special. And dads? Well, they took it to work with a thermos of coffee and didn't ask questions. You'd find stacks of these sandwiches at family reunions, church basement potlucks, or school field trips. Always cut into triangles. Always ready to go. And yet, like so many of the greats, it quietly disappeared. Maybe it was the rise of low cholesterol trends. Maybe it was the smell. But one thing's for sure: this sandwich had a moment. One taste, and it brings you straight back to yellow Tupperware bowls, floral print tablecloths, and summers when sweet and tangy egg salad was the unsung hero of every gathering. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. The creamed corn and cracker sandwich is one of those forgotten marvels that lived on the quiet edges of rural America, passed down in whispers, scribbled in the margins of old community cookbooks. It was born out of pure necessity. Not taste, not tradition, just the daily grind of stretching the pantry one more day. Here's how it worked: open a can of creamed corn. Spoon it onto soft sandwich bread. Then crush a handful of saltine crackers over the top. Close it. Done. A 10-minute sandwich, give or take, depending on how long it took you to find the can opener. And as strange as it sounds, it worked. The sweet, creamy corn soaked into the bread, while the crackers added a little crunch, just enough to give your teeth something to do. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't portable. And you probably ate it standing at the counter while deciding what to make for dinner later. But during hard times, the Depression, wartime rationing, or the end of a long week with nothing left in the fridge, this sandwich was a lifesaver. It filled your stomach. It used what you had. And for a lot of families, especially in the South and Midwest, it was just one of many resourceful ways to make something from nothing. Some added a slice of cheese. Others sprinkled black pepper or hot sauce. But at its core, it was a sandwich of survival, one that didn't apologize for being humble. Today, it's practically vanished, too messy for modern lunchboxes, too weird for restaurants. But once upon a time, creamed corn and crackers between bread was more than a meal. It was proof that when times got tough, people got creative. It was strong. It was smelly. And for the folks who grew up on it, it was comfort food with a bite. The sardine and onion sandwich was never meant to please the masses. It was a sandwich of confidence, the kind you made when you weren't trying to impress anyone. Just fill your stomach fast with something cheap, salty, and packed with flavor. You'd open a tin of oil-packed sardines, maybe mustard sauce if you were lucky, mash them gently with a fork, and layer them onto soft white or rye bread. Add a few slices of sharp raw onion, maybe a crack of black pepper, and if you had it, a little smear of butter or mustard to round it out. It was strong. It was oily. And it stayed with you long after lunch was over. But for decades, especially during the 1930s through the 1950s, this sandwich was a pantry regular in working-class homes. Sardines were cheap, high in protein, and required no cooking. Onions were everywhere. Together, they made a 10-minute meal that hit like a full plate. Fishermen packed it. Factory workers brought it in brown bags. Farmers ate it on porch steps with a hot mug of coffee. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't subtle. But it was real food. Of course, as America moved toward milder, safer lunch flavors, the sardine sandwich quietly disappeared. Too messy. Too pungent. Too much. But if you grew up with it, that first bite brings everything back. The brine. The crunch. The burn of onion and the salt of the sea. This wasn't a sandwich for everyone. It was a sandwich for people who didn't need to be impressed, just fed. Before pre-sliced deli meats filled every grocery aisle. If you wanted a quick, meaty sandwich, you reached for deviled ham. And for decades, one of the fastest lunches you could make was the deviled ham and lettuce sandwich, creamy, spicy, and just refined enough to pass for something fancy. Deviled ham started out in the late 1800s, a mix of finely ground cooked ham blended with spices, mustard, and a little mayo or butter. But by the mid-20th century, it had become a pantry staple, thanks to little metal cans from Underwood with the iconic Red Devil logo sitting quietly in nearly every American cupboard. You'd pop the can, spread a generous scoop of that seasoned ham onto soft sandwich bread, and top it with crisp lettuce, usually iceberg, for that cold crunch. Some people added pickles or a dab of mustard. Others kept it simple and smooth. In under 10 minutes, you had a sandwich that felt substantial and savory, the kind of thing you could serve at a picnic or pack in a lunchbox without apology. It was particularly popular in the 1940s through the 70s, when homemakers loved anything ready to eat and guests appreciated a lunch that didn't taste like peanut butter. Again, it had a sharpness, a depth, something that stood out, even if you weren't sure what it was. But like many vintage spreads, it faded with time, seen as too salty, too processed, or just too old-fashioned for modern tastes. Still, one bite takes you back to metal lunch pails, gingham picnic cloths, and the era when deviled ham meant you had something special in your sandwich even if it came from a can. You weren't supposed to do it. But everyone did. The bologna and potato chip sandwich wasn't born in a test kitchen, it was born at the lunch table. A stroke of crunchy genius discovered by hungry school kids who got tired of soft sandwiches and turned a bag of chips into something better. The formula was simple: 2 slices of white bread, 1 or 2 rounds of bologna, fried if you were lucky, and then the key move, a handful of potato chips smashed right in the middle. Any flavor worked, but plain salted or barbecue were the classics. Some added mustard. Some used mayo. Some just let the chips do the talking. It wasn't in cookbooks. But it showed up everywhere: cafeterias, brown bag lunches, even roadside diners for a time. By the 1960s and 70s, this sandwich had a loyal following. It was cheap. It was fast. And let's be honest, it was fun. That first bite? Loud, salty, satisfying. It felt rebellious, like you were breaking some unspoken food rule. And that's what made it great. Bologna was already the working-class lunch meat of choice, affordable, versatile, and easy to keep in the fridge. But when paired with chips, it went from boring to brilliant. Parents might have rolled their eyes. But they kept packing it, because it worked. And even though it's disappeared from most modern menus, replaced by wraps, hummus, and low-sodium turkey slices, this sandwich lives on in memory. Because for one shining moment, when the lunch bell rang and you took that first crunchy bite, you weren't just eating a sandwich. You were eating freedom. It started as last night's dinner. But by lunchtime the next day, it became pure magic. The cold meatloaf sandwich with mustard wasn't trendy. It wasn't dainty. And it certainly didn't care about presentation. But bite for bite, it may have been one of the most satisfying sandwiches ever to grace a lunchbox. This one was a staple in mid-century American kitchens, the kind of meal you didn't plan for, but always looked forward to. After Sunday dinner, there was always leftover meatloaf. And in homes across the country, that meant Monday's lunch was already taken care of. 2 thick slices of sandwich bread, white or rye, slathered with yellow mustard. Maybe a dab of ketchup if you were feeling bold. Then a cold, firm slice of homemade meatloaf pressed right in the middle. No heating. No frying. No fluff. It was dense, savory, and held together like a brick of comfort. Working men carried it to factories. Moms wrapped it in wax paper and tossed it in school bags. Farmers ate it out by the field. It didn't fall apart, it didn't need a fridge, and it filled you up like few things could. The mustard gave it just the right zip, a little punch to cut through the richness. Sometimes you'd find a pickle slice or a bit of onion tucked in. But most of the time, it was just meatloaf and mustard, and that was more than enough. Today, the idea of cold meatloaf in a sandwich sounds old-fashioned. Maybe even strange. But for decades, this was the working-class hero of the sandwich world, humble, reliable, and delicious in a way that no one talks about anymore. And maybe that's exactly why it deserves to be remembered. It wasn't loud. It didn't drip, crunch, or make a mess. But it had something a lot of sandwiches didn't: grace. The raisin bread and cream cheese sandwich was one of those soft-spoken classics that quietly held court at ladies' luncheons, church teas, and 1950s garden parties. It didn't shout for attention, it simply arrived on a delicate plate, cut into neat triangles, and charmed everyone at the table. And the best part? It took less than 10 minutes to make. All you needed was a loaf of soft raisin bread, the kind with just a hint of cinnamon, and a thick, even layer of cream cheese. Some versions added chopped walnuts. Others included a dash of orange zest, or even a touch of honey to elevate the sweetness. But at its core, it was all about balance, the tang of the cream cheese against the mild, chewy sweetness of the raisins. No cooking. No toasting. Just slice, spread, and serve. By the 1960s, this sandwich was a go-to for small social gatherings. It was light enough to serve with tea, quick enough for unexpected company, and elegant enough to make it into vintage cookbooks with words like dainty, refreshing, and ladylike. Kids liked it, too, especially those who preferred their lunches without meat, mess, or mystery. And for the adults? It was a perfect excuse to enjoy something sweet between meals. Today, this sandwich has mostly faded from menus and memories. But it represents a time when simplicity was stylish, and flavor didn't have to shout to be noticed. It wasn't made to impress the world. It was made to delight at one gentle bite at a time. It wasn't rich. It wasn't sweet. And it definitely wasn't what kids begged for at lunchtime. But in the world of vintage wellness and wartime rationing, the cottage cheese and green pepper sandwich was considered practically revolutionary. Starting in the 1940s and stretching into the early 1960s, this sandwich became a quiet favorite of health-minded homemakers, vegetarian diners, and anyone looking for a meatless meal that didn't break the bank. It was part of a growing trend toward lighter, fresher eating long before the word protein became trendy. The ingredients were humble: a generous scoop of cottage cheese spread thick on sandwich bread, topped with finely chopped or thinly sliced green bell pepper. Some added a sprinkle of salt and pepper. Others went fancy with a touch of paprika or fresh parsley. Occasionally, a slice of tomato or cucumber made its way in, but the core stayed the same: creamy, cool, and bright. It was cheap. It was quick. And it felt just a little ahead of its time. Served on whole wheat or rye, this sandwich appeared in lunchboxes, hospital menus, and reducing diets alike. You'd see it in 1950s women's magazines, recommended for summer lunches or light suppers on hot days. It was ideal for when the oven stayed off and the garden was bursting with peppers. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, and some folks thought it tasted like a side dish that wandered onto a sandwich. But for those who liked it, it was refreshing, filling, and wonderfully easy to make. Today, it's all but disappeared from the modern menu. But in its heyday, this cool, crunchy combo was a quiet staple, the kind of sandwich that reminded you, sometimes, less really is more. It sounds strange, doesn't it? Tuna and pineapple, two ingredients you'd never expect to share the same slice of bread. But once upon a time, this sandwich was a go-to favorite in homes that had more creativity than cash. The tuna and crushed pineapple sandwich was born in the tight-budget kitchens of the 1930s and 1940s, a time when women had to make every meal count and every can stretch a little further. Canned goods were cheap, shelf-stable, and endlessly versatile. And somehow, sweet pineapple and salty tuna just worked. The recipe was quick: drain a can of tuna, drain a can of crushed pineapple, and mix them together with a dollop of mayonnaise. Some added a little chopped celery for crunch. Others stirred in a touch of mustard or lemon juice to balance the sweetness. Then it all got piled onto sandwich bread, usually white, sometimes toasted, and occasionally served open-faced with a leaf of lettuce. This sandwich was about contrast. The sweet tang of pineapple cut through the dense saltiness of the tuna. It wasn't fishy, it wasn't heavy, it was light, bright, and weirdly refreshing. By the 1950s, you'd find this combo in women's magazines, PTA potlucks, and junior league cookbooks, often labeled as tropical tuna salad or Hawaiian-style tuna mix. It was just exotic enough to feel special, but simple enough to whip up in 10 minutes flat. Today, it's almost completely forgotten, too odd for modern tastes, too vintage for the mainstream. But back then, it was resourceful, satisfying, and just adventurous enough to keep lunch interesting. Because in the world of vintage sandwiches, flavor didn't always follow the rules, and that's what made them unforgettable. It was salty. It was briny. And if you grew up eating it, you probably didn't realize you were tasting war-era ingenuity on bread. The chipped beef and pickle sandwich came from a time when meat was rationed, refrigeration was a luxury, and lunch had to be fast, cheap, and shelf-stable. Enter chipped beef, those thin slices of dried, salted beef that came jarred or vacuum-packed, waiting patiently in the pantry for their moment. You'd pull out a few slices, sometimes rinse them to cut the salt, and layer them on white or rye bread with a generous swipe of mustard or mayo. Then came the pickles, usually dill, sliced thin, adding a sharp crunch that cut through the meat's intense savoriness. It was a sandwich of survival, but also one of balance: salty, sour, creamy, crisp. During World War II and well into the 1950s, this sandwich was a lunchbox regular. Chipped beef was beloved by military cooks and homemakers alike, because it required no refrigeration and lasted forever. And once you paired it with pickles, you had a 10-minute sandwich that felt satisfying without being heavy. You'd find it at factory break rooms, roadside diners, and grandma's kitchen counter. Some even fried the beef before assembling the sandwich for extra crispness. Others chopped it up and mixed it with relish and mayo for a makeshift salad spread. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't meant to be. But it was reliable, and that made it priceless. Today, chipped beef has nearly vanished from the modern kitchen. But back then, it was the backbone of countless quick meals, and paired with pickles, it became something greater than the sum of its salty parts. A forgotten classic worth rediscovering. It was sweet. It was tangy. And it had no business tasting as good as it did. The sweet pickle and bologna sandwich was one of those strange flavor pairings that just clicked. It didn't make sense on paper, but somehow, between two slices of soft white bread, magic happened. This was the sandwich of the 1950s school lunch table. The factory worker's lunch pail. The after-church snack on a lazy Sunday. It was fast, familiar, and surprisingly craveable. Here's how it worked: 1 or 2 slices of bologna, usually straight from the yellow-labeled package in the fridge. Then came the sweet pickles. Sometimes sliced coins, sometimes chopped relish. Either way, their sugary brine cut right through the soft, salty bologna and added that zing no kid could resist. Add a swipe of mayo or Miracle Whip, maybe a touch of yellow mustard if you were feeling bold. Press it all between white sandwich bread, no crust cutting required, and in under 5 minutes, you had something weirdly perfect. It wasn't gourmet. But it didn't need to be. During the mid-20th century, this sandwich was everywhere. It was born from cheap deli meat and pantry pickles, 2 things nearly every household had on hand. Moms made it without thinking. Kids devoured it without question. It disappeared slowly, as bologna faded from the modern fridge and sweet pickles gave way to artisanal spreads and sugar-conscious choices. But for those who remember, that first bite is pure time travel. Back to a vinyl kitchen chair. A glass of cold milk. A folded paper napkin and a lunch that didn't try too hard because it didn't have to. Sweet. Salty. Simple. And unforgettable. Before tuna salad took over lunchboxes, there was the cold salmon croquette sandwich, a leftover masterpiece pulled straight from last night's supper. In the 1940s and 50s, salmon croquettes weren't just a dinner, they were a strategy. Made from canned salmon, mashed potatoes, breadcrumbs, and seasonings, they were fried into golden patties that could stretch a single can of fish across an entire family meal. But the real magic came the next day, served cold, between slices of soft sandwich bread. You'd open the icebox, grab a cold croquette, and gently place it on white or wheat bread. Some folks added mayonnaise or mustard. Others layered on a bit of shredded lettuce or a slice of tomato. The croquette itself was firm, flaky, and full of flavor, holding together like a meat patty but tasting like the sea. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like it. This was a sandwich you could serve with sweet tea on a summer porch or wrap in wax paper for a Sunday picnic. Cold croquette sandwiches were especially popular in southern kitchens, where thrift met hospitality. They took 10 minutes or less to prepare and offered a cool, satisfying contrast to the hot, fried version from the night before. During the post-war years, with women balancing household work and tighter food budgets, these sandwiches were a make-ahead dream. You cooked once and fed twice without losing an ounce of flavor. Today, they've almost disappeared, the word croquette sounding too old-fashioned for modern menus. But for those who remember, that cold, peppery salmon patty between bread tasted like planning ahead, like resourcefulness, and like a time when leftovers weren't just reheated, they were reinvented. Long before rotisserie chicken became a grocery aisle shortcut, there was canned chicken, humble, dependable, and ready to turn into something surprisingly fancy in just 10 minutes. The canned chicken and almond sandwich was a quiet staple of 1950s luncheons and 1960s bridal showers. It wasn't a working man's meal or a kid's lunchbox regular. No, this sandwich was designed for afternoon gatherings, where the teacups clinked and the crusts came cut off. The core recipe was simple: drain a can of white chicken meat, break it up with a fork, and fold it into a creamy mix of mayonnaise, sometimes with a dash of lemon juice or a spoonful of sour cream. Then came the texture: slivered almonds, either toasted or raw, giving each bite a subtle crunch and nutty depth. Occasionally, chopped celery or grapes found their way in for freshness, but the almond and chicken combo was the star. Spread it on soft white sandwich bread, or better yet, delicate finger rolls. Trim the crusts, cut into quarters or T-triangles, and just like that, you had a 10-minute sandwich that looked like it took all morning. This one showed up at baby showers, card games, garden parties, and in the pages of vintage cookbooks with names like Elegant Lunches Made Easy. It was light but satisfying, mild but memorable. The almonds gave it class. The canned chicken gave it convenience. Today, we rarely think of chicken and almonds as sandwich partners. But in mid-century America, this was the definition of ladylike luxury, a dish that proved even pantry staples could be dressed up for the spotlight. It didn't shout. It whispered elegance. And for one crisp, creamy bite, that was more than enough. It broke every rule. Too soft, too heavy, too cheesy, and absolutely perfect. The macaroni and cheese sandwich wasn't born in a cookbook. It was born in a kitchen full of leftovers, hungry kids, and a need to make lunch in 5 minutes flat. By the 1960s and 70s, boxed mac and cheese had become a pantry icon. It was cheap, filling, and kid-approved. But when there was just a scoop or two left in the pot, you didn't throw it out. You turned it into a sandwich. Usually served cold or barely reheated, the method was simple: scoop leftover mac and cheese onto a slice of white bread, spread it evenly, and top it with another slice. Some people toasted it like a grilled cheese. Others ate it soft, straight from the lunchbox. Some added a slice of American cheese or a swipe of ketchup, because why not? It was starchy. It was gooey. And it was exactly the kind of lunch that made other kids jealous at the cafeteria table. This sandwich was a quiet hit among working-class families, where nothing went to waste and carbs were king. It didn't need deli meat, lettuce, or anything fancy. Just last night's dinner, between bread. Homemakers loved it because it saved time and money. Kids loved it because, well, mac and cheese. In a sandwich. And though it never earned a place in glossy cookbooks, it lived on in the folds of community recipe pamphlets and the unspoken traditions of thrifty kitchens. Today, it might seem like a food dare. But back then? It was smart. It was comforting. And it turned leftovers into something worth looking forward to. It had the bite of mustard, the creaminess of mayo, and the crunch of sizzling bacon, all packed into one unapologetically rich bite. The deviled egg and bacon sandwich was never meant to be subtle. It was the rebellious cousin of the polite tea sandwich, and it came out of mid-century kitchens swinging with flavor. Deviled eggs had been a party staple since the early 20th century. But by the 1950s and 60s, clever home cooks realized they didn't need to wait for a potluck to enjoy that creamy, tangy filling. They took the mashed yolks already mixed with mustard, mayo, vinegar, and spices and spread them right onto sandwich bread. Then they did something bold. They added crispy bacon. Sometimes the bacon was crumbled. Other times, full strips were laid end to end. Either way, it took the sandwich from light snack to full-blown meal. It was messy. It was rich. It was smoky, spicy, salty, and just sweet enough, depending on the relish or paprika you used. You'd find this sandwich wrapped in wax paper in 1960s picnic baskets, packed into lunch pails on construction sites, or sliced diagonally and served next to pickles at neighborhood barbecues. It was fast, made in under 10 minutes, and filled you up better than most cold sandwiches ever could. It didn't rely on store-bought deli meat. It came from what you made at home: boiled eggs, leftover bacon, and a few pantry staples. The result? A sandwich that felt homemade, hearty, and completely satisfying. These days, you rarely see it: too messy for cafes, too bold for diet books. But once upon a time, this was the sandwich you made when flavor came first, and napkins were optional. This was the kind of sandwich that made people raise an eyebrow. Until they took a bite. The boiled ham and raisin sandwich was a strange marriage of sweet and savory, born not in a deli, but from the frugal imagination of Southern home cooks in the early 20th century. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a reminder of how creative families had to be when options were few and budgets tight. Boiled ham was common, affordable, salty, and easy to slice thin. But raisins? Those were the surprise. Plumped in warm water or chopped finely, they were often stirred into a simple mayo or mustard spread, sometimes with a dash of clove or a splash of vinegar. That sweet contrast, the chew of the raisins against the brine of the ham, made for a sandwich that was soft, flavorful, and totally unexpected. By the 1940s and 50s, this sandwich made its way into church picnics, ladies' auxiliary luncheons, and the pages of community cookbooks. It wasn't everyday fare, it was a special occasion sandwich you could make with pantry ingredients. Some versions even called for raisin bread to double down on the sweetness. Others layered it with crisp lettuce for texture or spread a thin line of apple butter beneath the ham, adding depth with each bite. To modern eyes, it seems odd. Maybe even wrong. But back then? It was thrifty, elegant, and filled with contrast and care. This sandwich has almost vanished, too peculiar for today's menus, too humble for revival cookbooks. But for those who remember, it tasted like Sunday best, pressed between slices of bread. A forgotten flavor worth revisiting. Some sandwiches were made for the lunchbox. This one was made for lace gloves and linen napkins. The egg and caviar tea sandwich was one of the most luxurious little bites you could serve in the mid-20th century, a small, crustless triangle that packed a whisper of wealth and a whole lot of flavor. At its core, it was a simple mix: finely mashed hard-boiled eggs blended with a touch of softened butter or cream cheese. The spread was seasoned just right, maybe a pinch of salt, a dash of white pepper, and sometimes a few chopped chives. But the real star came last: a delicate spoonful of black caviar, carefully dotted on top or folded in. This wasn't the kind of sandwich you ate at the counter. It belonged at bridal teas, formal luncheons, and ladies' society meetings, usually arranged in perfect rows on silver trays, garnished with parsley sprigs and paper doilies. You'd find the recipe in the back pages of 1940s and 50s etiquette books, nestled between salmon mousse and aspic molds. It wasn't common, but it made an impression, especially in upper-class homes or special gatherings where presentation mattered. The sandwich itself was paper-thin. Cut with precision. Served chilled. And eaten in just 2 polite bites. Of course, not everyone had access to real caviar. Many used mock caviar made from lumpfish roe or even black olive tapenade. But the idea remained: elevate the humble egg sandwich with a touch of glamour. Today, it's almost vanished, too formal for modern tastes, too delicate for grab and go. But for one generation, this little sandwich was the definition of elegance, a bite-sized reminder that even the simplest ingredients could shine, when served with style. This wasn't the sandwich you bragged about in the school cafeteria. It was the one you smelled before you saw, and if you knew, you knew. The Braunschweiger and onion sandwich was rich, strong, and absolutely unforgettable. A cold sandwich built on bold flavor and old-world tradition, it was popular in German-American homes throughout the Midwest and parts of the South from the 1940s to the 1970s. At its core was Braunschweiger, a soft, spreadable liver sausage made from pork liver, seasoned with spices and smoked to a mellow, savory depth. It came in a tube from the deli case or in a bright orange wrapper from the fridge. You'd slice it thick or spread it thin and layer it on fresh rye, wheat, or white bread. But what really brought it to life? A generous helping of raw white or yellow onions, sliced thin for crunch and sharpness. Some added mustard. Others smeared on butter, or went full classic with a slice of cheese and a dill pickle spear on the side. But at its heart, this was a no-nonsense, working man's sandwich, quick to make, high in protein, and impossible to mistake for anything else. It showed up in lunch pails, factory break rooms, and late-night snack plates. It wasn't dainty. It wasn't polite. But it was deeply satisfying, especially if you grew up with it. As food trends shifted and liver lost its appeal, Braunschweiger slowly disappeared from American fridges. But for those who remember, that creamy, iron-rich bite paired with the fire of fresh onion was a flavor bomb, wrapped in nostalgia. A forgotten favorite that didn't whisper, it shouted. It was sweet. It was salty. And it had just enough tang to feel like a party between two slices of bread. The pineapple and ham salad sandwich wasn't your everyday lunch, it was a retro classic pulled from the kind of mid-century recipe cards printed in pink ink with scalloped borders. It was the kind of sandwich you'd see on tea tables, baby showers, or ladies' luncheons of the 1950s and 60s. At its core was leftover baked ham, finely chopped until it was almost minced. Into the bowl it went, mixed with mayonnaise or sometimes Miracle Whip for that extra zing. Then came the star, crushed canned pineapple, drained but still juicy enough to lend its sweetness and brightness to the mix. Some versions included a dash of yellow mustard, chopped celery for crunch, or a handful of diced pimento for color. The flavor? Sweet, savory, creamy, and totally unique. The pineapple balanced the salt of the ham, while the mayo held it all together in that smooth, retro way only mid-century salads could pull off. Served cold on soft white or whole wheat bread, this sandwich was often cut into neat triangles, with the crusts trimmed away and the filling peeking out just a little. It wasn't just food, it was presentation. You'd find it on tiered trays next to deviled eggs and ribbon sandwiches, served with lemonade in punch glasses or iced tea with mint leaves. It was light, unexpected, and just different enough to stand out in a crowd of tuna and egg salads. Today, it's all but vanished, too quirky for modern lunch menus, too nostalgic for deli counters. But in its time, this sandwich was a tropical whisper at the heart of a carefully planned gathering. A little bit of sunshine, tucked into a slice of bread. This wasn't just a sandwich. It was Sunday supper in your hands. The roast pork and applesauce sandwich was the ultimate leftover transformation, born from frugal, flavor-loving households who knew how to make every meal stretch just a little further. When the Sunday roast was done and the plates were cleared, there was always that last slice or two of pork. Too good to throw out, but not quite enough for another full meal. That's when this sandwich stepped in. Thinly sliced roast pork, still tender from the oven and seasoned with garlic, salt, and maybe a hint of sage, was layered onto soft white bread or sometimes a crusty roll if you had one left from the weekend. Then came the surprise, a generous spoonful of applesauce. It might sound strange now, but back then, this pairing was as classic as salt and pepper. The sweet, slightly tart applesauce cut through the richness of the pork, adding a refreshing contrast that made every bite feel balanced and complete. Some versions added a swipe of mustard, others a dab of mayonnaise. A few sprinkled black pepper right over the applesauce. But the core of the sandwich was always the same, savory meets sweet in the most comforting way possible. This sandwich showed up in lunchboxes on Mondays, wrapped in wax paper and packed next to an oatmeal cookie. It was filling, honest, and deeply rooted in tradition, especially in rural homes and farming communities where pork roasts were a weekend ritual. Today, it's a relic too humble for menus, too homemade for modern lunch chains. But if you ever had one fresh from the fridge, with the applesauce just soaking into the bread, you remember the taste. You remember the comfort. You remember how something so simple could feel so right. Before seafood came frozen in plastic pouches, there was the crab salad and celery sandwich, a cool, creamy favorite from vintage luncheon tables and coastal summer spreads. This wasn't a sandwich made in a rush. It was one made with care, designed for garden parties, Easter brunches, and those quiet midday moments when you wanted something elegant but effortless. At the center was crab meat, usually canned or leftover from a crab boil, depending on where you lived. In the 1940s and 50s, recipes often called for white lump crab, flaked gently and folded into a smooth mixture of mayonnaise, a squeeze of lemon juice, and a dash of Worcestershire or Old Bay seasoning if you were feeling fancy. But the real secret weapon? Celery. Crisp, finely chopped, and stirred in for that fresh snap in every bite. Sometimes home cooks added a few extras, a spoonful of sweet relish, a sprinkle of dill, or minced parsley to brighten things up. Others went full retro and mixed in a bit of pimento or hard-boiled egg. But at its heart, this sandwich was simple and refreshing. Spread thick on white sandwich bread or soft rolls, the filling was cool and creamy, a perfect contrast to a hot summer afternoon. Crusts were often trimmed, sandwiches cut into halves or quarters, and sometimes served on chilled plates with paper doilies and lemon wedges on the side. You'd find them at bridal showers, church receptions, and women's clubs, places where refinement mattered, but convenience still counted. They took 10 minutes to assemble, but looked like you'd spent all morning. Today, crab salad sandwiches have all but disappeared from everyday menus. Too delicate, too old-fashioned, too forgotten. But for a generation who knew how to entertain with a can of crab and a crisp stalk of celery, this sandwich was a small luxury, quietly served, never rushed, and always remembered. This was a sandwich that didn't shout. It whispered. The watercress and butter sandwich was never meant to satisfy hunger in the way ham or cheese might. No, this was a refined bite, created for moments of leisure, quiet conversation, and porcelain teacups. Popular in both British and American tea culture from the late 1800s through the 1950s, this sandwich became a fixture at garden parties, bridal teas, and high society luncheons. Its ingredients were minimal, but its message was clear: elegance can be simple. All you needed was fresh watercress, peppery, crisp, and delicately green, and a generous spread of softened, salted butter on very thin slices of white bread. That was it. No meat. No mayonnaise. No mustard. Just butter and greens. But it was all about the balance, the cool creaminess of the butter against the sharp bite of the watercress, all wrapped in tender, crustless bread. The sandwich was always served cold, usually cut into precise fingers or triangles, arranged neatly on porcelain or silver trays. Sometimes a sprig of extra watercress would garnish the side, or a curl of lemon peel for color. This was the sandwich of afternoon hours, where time slowed and appearances mattered. It showed up in etiquette manuals and society columns, often alongside cucumber sandwiches and petit fours. By the 1970s, it had faded from everyday use, too dainty, too old-fashioned. Supermarkets didn't carry watercress as readily, and butter sandwiches were pushed aside for heartier, flashier fare. But for those who remember, the watercress and butter sandwich was a kind of poetry. A soft, green pause in the middle of a busy world. It was never about filling you up. It was about slowing you down. We started this journey with a slice of bread, and ended with a slice of history. From lunchbox legends to forgotten tea sandwiches, each one of these 10-minute creations tells a quiet story of busy moms making do, of leftover roasts becoming something new, and of communities that passed recipes down through index cards, not algorithms. These weren't gourmet meals. They were survival food. Celebration food. Sometimes both at once. Some of these sandwiches sound strange to us now: pickles with peanut butter, pineapple with ham, but back then, they made sense. They stretched the budget, fed the family, and showed creativity in every bite. And maybe that's what makes them so special. They weren't just made to be eaten. They were made to be remembered. So the next time you're hungry and short on time, skip the drive-thru. Reach back, not forward. Because sometimes, the best ideas aren't new, they're just forgotten. And if you enjoyed rediscovering these lost recipes, don't forget to subscribe, because this channel is full of stories that history left behind, and we're just getting started. What sandwich surprised you most? Which one would you actually try? Tell us in the comments, we're reading every one. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep digging through those dusty cookbooks. You never know what you'll find.